Morning, everyone. We're just going to give a moment for everyone to arrive in the Zoom room. It usually takes a few minutes for everyone to log in. Welcome, welcome. Well, let's begin. On behalf of Rabbi Lynn Greenoff and the board of Women of Reform Temple in Victoria, BC, I'd like to welcome you all to our first lecture in our speaker series, Building Bridges, on the theme of Kvel at the Well, celebrating the joys of being Jewish. We're so glad you could join us. My name is Marilyn Wolovic, and I'm a board member and active congregant at Kolat Mayim. I'm grateful to have found such a nurturing and welcoming community of support in my life. And this talk is being offered with the funding support from the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island, as well as the Isaac and Sophie Waldman Endowment Fund held at the Vancouver Foundation. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations, and I am the granddaughter of Eastern European Jewish immigrants who came to find safety here in Canada. Our theme for this year's Building Bridges is Kvel at the Well. And within the context of the dramatic increase in anti-Semitism that we've all witnessed since the events of October 7, we believe that it is more important than ever to highlight our proud and strong Jewish culture, history, and heritage. This series will provide a unique forum to explore themes of Jewish identity, faith, traditions, and community, and to highlight our resilience, survival, and hopes for our future. Before we get started, and I turn things over to today's featured guest speaker, Rabbi Liz P.G. Hirsch, I just want to briefly explain to you our Zoom format here. We're in a webinar format, so the chat is not available. And the talk is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered today. Rabbi Hirsch will give a 45 to 50-minute talk, and at around noon, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session. And you can enter your questions in the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen. Please keep your questions short and ask in the form of a question rather than a statement. Closed captioning is available, and we will start now. So today, I am so pleased to welcome Rabbi Liz P.G. Hirsch to speak on the topic of just for this moment, stepping up to lead. Rabbi Hirsch is a trailblazer in the Jewish community. She's been the CEO of Women of Reform Judaism since July of 2023. In today's talk, she's going to draw on her wealth of experience and insight into women's leadership. Rabbi Hirsch posts the popular weekly podcast called Just for This, where she invites women leaders to discuss their journeys, challenges, and triumphs. I've listened to several of these podcasts, and I can't recommend them highly enough. She's very engaging, and the women that she interviews are fascinating souls and wise women. So I encourage you to check out her podcast. Rabbi Hirsch served as rabbi of Temple Anshe Amunim in Pittsfield, Massachusetts from 2018 to 23. And she was ordained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York, where she was honored as a Wexner Graduate Fellow, a Tisch Fellow, and a WRJ Scholar. Rabbi Hirsch was the founding chair of the RAC Massachusetts and serves on the National Council of Jewish Women Rabbis for Reproductive Rabbinic Advisory Council. She played a key role in the 2020 campaign to pass the ROE Act in Massachusetts. So we're so honored and delighted to welcome Rabbi Liz P.G. Hirsch as our first speaker to launch our Kvel at the Well speaker series. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Hirsch.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, and to everyone organizing the series and the webinar today. It's so great to be here with you. Nice, even though we can't see all of each other's faces, to see some familiar names and to get to connect with some new folks as well. So first, I just want to say that I love the title of your series, Kvel at the Well. It's such a fun way to connect. And I know that your congregation's name, Kolot Mayim, also involves the idea of water. So I wanted to just reflect on that for a minute as a way into our conversation. I love studying the Bible as literature through that lens. And that was the focus of much of my rabbinic coursework and teaching at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And my undergraduate degree, my focus there was environmental studies with a focus on water policy. So I always love drawing these connections, right? Water is the essence of life. And this is something that the Bible really understands and carries through to today. And water and the well are often really connected to women as a place where they would gather. Women often had the responsibility of drawing water among their ancient biblical tasks, right? So we have a lot of scenes that happen at the well throughout the Bible. There's Isaac and Rebecca, Moses and Zipporah, and more. And actually, whenever we have this type of a moment, the kind of deja vu, I've been here before moment in our biblical text, that's called, the technical term for that is a type scene. And when you've got a particular sort of scene where it plays out of, in this case, sort of someone meets someone else at a well, we know if someone is at a well, then they're about to have a significant meeting, and it very often involves the female identified characters in our tradition. Of course, folks may know about the well that followed Miriam around in the desert as well, too. That would be handy in any kind of desert, but that draws and builds that connection too. So I just love that. And I think as a way into some of what I'm going to share, I think that while the well was really an actual physical meeting place for those women, today we can understand the well a little bit more metaphorically, right? As our congregations, our communities, when we gather in these online spaces for learning and building relationships and community and sharing our stories, I think that those can really be our wellspring today. So I had to share a little bit about how much I love the title, and also for you to help to know a little bit more about my background and some of the way that I think about some different things. So Marilyn shared my bio. To get a little bit more off the page with you on that, I grew up in Massachusetts, close to Boston, and I was ordained by HUC in New York, and I live now in Cincinnati. I grew up going to a relatively small Reform congregation, and my family was involved in our synagogue and our congregation. But because of the size of our community, whenever I wanted to engage more deeply with Jewish life, I was going to something. I was going to our Reform Movement summer camp, the Eisner camp, where I grew up and worked full-time early in my career. And I was going to, youth group events, and I was going to Israel, going to Reform Movement North American gatherings like Biennial and the Litaken team convening that happened in Washington, D.C. So for me, it was about that flow, about that movement of going to places, and something that I needed to choose, that I was actively going to seek out. Fast forward to coming to the place of serving WRJ as the CEO. I later was able to connect the dots that all of those experiences that I benefited from as a young person and a young adult, making my way through the world where I didn't have the immediacy of Jewish community in such a vibrant and deep way immediately in my back door, that all of those experiences were either founded, established, supported, and even to this day, through our philanthropy and financial work, through the Women of Reform Judaism, as their role, as our role one of our key pieces that we do being the philanthropic arm of the reform movement. So Marilyn mentioned my role, my title, it's been shared in the different pieces. I want to make sure, especially without the chance for us to schmooze a little bit and get to chat more, just to give you a little bit more context on Women of Reform Judaism and who and what we are. Some folks may be very familiar, and some folks may be less familiar. So WRJ, which we're in our 111th year this year, and we look great, is the women's empowerment affiliate of the Reform movement. So we work closely with the Union for Reform Judaism. We work closely with the Hebrew Union College and the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the Religious Action Center, all of these other arms and affiliates of the movement. We are our own distinct organization with our own leadership and our own board. And we're a North American organization. And I saw among the participants that our immediate past president, Sarah Charney from Toronto, is logged on. So glad that Sarah could be joining us. And it's significant to mention Sarah, which I would have done in either case. Glad to see that she's here, is that Sarah was our first president from Canada, our first lay chair of our board from Canada. And we really, and you'll hear it in the way that I share some of the things that we focus on and the work that we do, are a North American organization. We function and we work throughout the world, and especially have deep connections in Israel. I'll share more about that later as well too. But really, when we speak about the work that we do, we take and think about that from a North American perspective. Now, you may have heard, and I'll speak more about it in a minute, about sisterhoods or women's groups. And our sisterhoods and our women's groups are core to who we are and the work that we do on the ground. Our sisterhoods, also called women's groups, are the local unit of participation, engagement, and sort of your front doorstep place affiliated with a Reform movement congregation generally, to engage with other women who are passionate and connected about Reform and Progressive Judaism. And there are also pathways for individuals to be part of WRJ as well too. You can join as an individual member, take part in our activities, and connect in with us. And we also have a regional structure. Those are our districts. We have 7 districts throughout North America, and that's a way for folks to get connected up with each other and spend time together a little bit more locally. Something that I always really am passionate about emphasizing is that WRJ is a lay-driven movement. So we have a wonderful staff team that I lead who work on the North American level, and we have staff members whose roles are supporting our district and local groups. And we have a fabulous lay North American board who work on that level. And then for our districts, anything that happens regionally and certainly anything that happens locally, all of that is driven by lay leaders. We don't have staff out in the field exactly because we are the women's empowerment organization of the Reform movement, and we empower and love to have all of those leaders stepping up and leading in their own ways and really organizing and doing anything. I'll just share a story about that because it's relevant to the bio info that Marilyn shared about me, that prior to starting at WRJ, when I was serving as a congregational rabbi in Massachusetts, I was involved with what's for us here in the States, or anyone zooming in from the States, a very live issue for these next few coming days about abortion access. And we know that abortion is on the ballot in many states throughout the US, and has been a really relevant and important issue that WRJ has been working on for decades. And we know that the policies and laws are different in Canada, and that's good. And one of the issues that's been so important and so valuable to us, when I was working as a congregational rabbi in Massachusetts and was involved in starting up the state-based project, the state chapter of the Religious Action Center, the Reform Movement's presence for social justice and social action, with the main office in Washington, D.C., but with now 10 state projects throughout the United States. We were working on a piece of legislation called the ROE Act that Marilyn mentioned, that this was prior to the Dobbs decision that struck down abortion access as the law of the land in the United States. But with the makeup of the Supreme Court, it was assumed and likely folks knew something like that was going to come, and that states with the will and the ability were going to take it into their own hands to protect it on the state level. And I was getting involved in the coalition and doing the work and starting to recruit congregations and sisterhoods and women's groups to be on the ground to help with the passing of this legislation, which we did ultimately pass and safeguarded access to reproductive care in Massachusetts preemptively and in a strong way. But one of the staff members that I was working with was attending a coalition meeting, and one of the other organizers turned to her and asked her who she was representing. She said she was representing the Religious Action Center and the Reform Movement and Women of Reform Judaism, because that was the portfolio she was holding. And the other organizer, the other staff person said, "Oh, good, the Reform Jews are here, and now we're going to win this thing." So that's how we, show up in the world, and we do that work together. So what I'm going to share with you today is, I started this leadership role as CEO of WRJ in July 2023, and I have recently moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, with my family. And what's amazing about that is right now here in Cincinnati, Zooming to you, I am just a few miles from where we as WRJ, known then by our name as the National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods, we were founded here in Cincinnati, Ohio, as with many of the other arms and affiliates of the Reform Movement, the Hebrew Union College, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which became the URJ, and the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the union for all Reform Movement rabbis. So we've come so far, and at the same time remained so dedicated to our core principles. And this is something that really, not only physically with where I'm located now, when I'm not traveling around and visiting with our sisterhoods and women's groups throughout North America, it really for me represents how we have progressed so much and also really remain dedicated to our core principles and our core values. Those are sisterhood, spirituality, and social justice. And if we're thinking about this from a leadership frame, having a clarity of your principles, your pillars, what you stand for, gives that clarity of vision to be able to focus and to do excellent work and to know these are areas that we work in. And sisterhood, spirituality, and social justice, as I get into them, there's quite a breadth to them, but also we know what we do and we know what we don't do. We don't sell ice cream on a street corner unless we can figure out how to connect that into sisterhood, spirituality, or social justice. I'm sure I could if that challenge were presented to me, but it gives that clarity. So I think that's an important piece of our way into a conversation about leadership. WRJ has a really rich past, present, and future, as does our whole Reform movement. And I'm proud to be among the leaders of the Reform movement. And we make our way through Jewish time in a variety of ways, right? Through that past, present, and future, we can think about it. But also we have our weekly cycle for Shabbat. Shabbat, as we like to say, is the gift of a holiday we get to celebrate every week. We have prayers that we say on a daily basis, or some prayers that we say in the evening and some in the morning. We have the cycle of the month, which follows the lunar calendar and Rosh Chodesh observances, which for centuries, for thousands of years, have been sacred and special, in particular to women. And we have our yearly holidays. But I also like to think about making each moment count, the perhaps the mundane moments as much as the sacred ones that we set aside for Shabbat or holiday or prayer observances. And that's what I consider each week on my podcast, Just for This. Each week on a weekly cycle, we talk about stepping up just for this moment. So where do we get that from? Where do I get that from? Inspired by the book of Esther, each week I invite women to talk about women in leadership. The theme of the show, Just for This, is based on a verse from the story of Esther, from that book of our Bible. It's chapter 4, verse 14. Esther has become queen. She's Jewish, but she's hiding her identity because that's what she and her uncle Mordecai have deemed is safest for her at that time, is not to be public about her Judaism, which is a fascinating line of conversation that I've been discussing a lot with my recent guests. Very relevant for us. But then I know we're in webinar mode, so I can't have a chorus of booing, so you'll have to imagine that. But Haman, the villain, is plotting to kill all the Jews of Persia. And we reach that moment in the drama, and Mordecai, Esther's uncle, he comes to her and says, now is the moment when you need to reveal your identity. You have to go to your husband, the king, and you alone can save your people. And then he says to her, who knows, maybe it's just for this moment that you're in this position of leadership. And then I turn to each of my guests, and I'll be so pleased to share some excerpts from the podcast and hopefully pique your interest if you haven't already been listening along. Some of those moments, I ask them to reflect on what's that just for this moment for them, when they found themselves in the right place to lead at the right time. So today I'm pleased to share with you, through this leadership lens of stepping up just for this moment, a deeper exploration of WRJ's 3 pillars, pulling out some leadership lessons and also sharing some just for this moments for my guests that really encapsulate those themes. So just to recall for folks, if it's less familiar and to know where we're going, our 3 pillars at Women of Reform Judaism are sisterhood, spirituality, and social justice. I mentioned that we are a lay-driven movement, that we are North American, and a bit about our structure. Now, that means we have, for the past 111 years, been a hybrid remote organization. We were doing hybrid remote before that was the way that everyone functioned in the world, first by building technology, and then also by necessity during the pandemic, leaving us with the ability to have a webinar conversation like this without me traveling across North America to be with you, and lowering the carbon footprint in all of those ways. And we've been in that hybrid remote mode because we are a North American organization. That said, something that I've been really passionate about is making these visits with our local community and connecting with individuals, learning their stories. And for me, that's another important lesson of leadership is just connecting with folks locally on the ground, even as we maintain our North American work and that more global perspective that we have. A highlight of our sisterhood pillar last year was our Freed Women's Conference. That's our triennial every 3 years conference where we gather on a North American level in a city throughout North America for learning and for prayer and community action and joy, and also with a lot of workshops that directly benefit our local sisterhoods and women's groups. Now, I really do think that the pandemic in particular got us out of the habit of getting together. And I mentioned that getting together for Jewish community and experiences is a real part of my story, going to places to gather and to be together. And I am so happy to be with you virtually today, but we do know, and there have been studies, and we feel it when we actually have the time to be together, that the best way to be together is in person. And there are so many ways to do that throughout, our broader reform movement, but in particular through WRJ on a local level, or if you don't have a local group nearby to you, through the district or through North American gatherings. And in many ways, we, as Women of Reform Judaism, are a leadership incubator for the reform movement. As I've gone throughout the US and spoken with folks throughout the US and Canada and throughout the world, if they've gotten involved locally or even up to our North American level, I often ask them to say, how did you get here? And so often the answer to that question was, well, somebody asked me. I showed up at an event, and by the time I left, I had a job or I had a leadership role. And the response to that was, who, me? Like, why are you asking me to do that? And there have actually been a lot of really fascinating and interesting, important studies that women are less likely to step into a role if they perceive that they are not fully 100% qualified to do that, right? They've done this research that male-identified individuals will say, I have 60 to 75% of what's being looked for, either in that professional position or in the volunteer role. And women need to really be up to that 90, 95% level of feeling like their qualifications or past experience meet what is needed for the role. So in that way, I think that we still and will continue to play a really important role of inviting women, female-identified individuals, and others into leadership, perhaps for the first time, because of that invitation in when it's really often something that's really gendered, stepping into leadership in a professional or certainly a volunteer capacity. What I want to do now is to make sure that as we're framing our conversation, my discussion with you today around stepping up just for this moment and the podcast, that one of the things that I'm blessed and able to do on the podcast is to share these voices and stories of women leaders. And that's really one of the things that I view as so important about the podcast, is making sure that women's voices are heard, and we're empowering and giving women a platform in that kind of way as well too. So I want to share a first excerpt from the podcast with you, where I ask my guest, Abigail Pogrebin, who is a writer and author. She's the daughter of Letty Cotton Pogrebin, the well-known feminist leader and founder of Ms. Magazine. And I asked her to tell us her just for this moment. And something else to know about her, although she'll refer to it in this excerpt that you're going to hear, is that she is a past president of Central Synagogue in New York City, one of the most respected congregations throughout North America, and sort of her thought process around that. So each of these is giving you a taste. I'm not going to give you even the sort of the full bio background, and we're jumping in the middle of the conversation. So I hope that you'll hear how this is related to our sisterhood pillar and inspiring and encouraging women's leadership and leadership development. And then also, as you're hearing each of these excerpts, to be inspired to go and listen either to the full episode or to other episodes. So I'm going to share my screen and audio so that you can listen to this first excerpt. Thinking about the continued connections as you were laying out between Yom Kippur and Purim, that day where we sort of rehearse or approximate our deaths, right? Purim is this crazy, wild, joyful day on our calendar, and it's because we survived and we lived, and it was based on the choice that Esther made to stand up in that moment. So she had to overcome her fear and make a choice to do something at risk of her life. And I love to invite my guests to put themselves in Esther's place and to ask you, has there been a moment like that for you where you found yourself as the person who can step up and lead at the right place at the right time to make that choice to lead?
I mean, I don't want to be so chutzpahdik as to say that I've had an Esther moment in a way, because it just almost feels more highfalutin than I deserve. And I don't mean that as false modesty. I feel like my role models are doing the heavy lifting, and you're one of them. I don't sort of play in that playground of leadership. Well, I will say, though, because I do think you're right to ask ourselves what is an Esther moment for us, and to ask it on a regular basis, is where do I have a role to play? And I feel like for me, it has been in a way to be the bridge between the person who knows a lot and the person who is afraid of what they don't know. That there are many smart Jews out there who have an anxiety of ignorance. I was one of them, and I know it's very hard to begin. And sometimes you choose to opt out because you're a smart person who doesn't want to appear in spaces as if you don't actually know the difference between Sukkot and Shavuot, or what the Akedah is about when people refer to it, or frankly, maybe the difference between the war of 67 and 73. But I do believe that I can be the person who is asking the questions and reaching out for the teachers, because I'm such a believer in teachers, and to say, there are so many teachers I couldn't get to, but I am that person who's kind of always a little obsessed with the great instructor and the great conversation. And if I'm doing that work for you, I can present a way at the holiday of Tu B'Shvat in a way that you never thought about the birthday of the trees. Or I can actually make you take a look at Yom HaShoah, which is a holiday where we memorialize an unthinkable chapter in our history, and say, why are so few of us actually marking it on our calendars and prioritizing it and celebrating it? I can hopefully be the conduit, because I could not feel more strongly that this is an extraordinary, magical tradition that many people have decided is either beyond them or too late for them, or too uninteresting. And I just think it's the most glimmering, challenging, deepening offering that so many people are passed by. And if I can kind of say, do you want to take a second look at this before you move on? That's an Esther moment. And the only other one I would mention is a little more institutional connected, which is Central Synagogue. You know, as I've mentioned, I didn't have one for my whole life, and then fell in love with Central. And once you join or get pulled in, they often tap you for leadership if they hopefully see some potential. And I ultimately was asked to serve as its president for 3 years. And there were several naysayers. I will admit it to you. Sometimes it was whispering, sometimes it came through to me where I shouldn't have heard it. And it rattled me a little bit. You know, someone saying, you know, she doesn't have executive experience, and she's never been in the business world. And can she handle a budget that's as big as it is, and a membership that's as large as it is? And, you know, those things can get under your skin. And honestly, Rabbi Hirsch, you suddenly begin to say, well, maybe I should wait. Maybe it's not my moment. Maybe there should be more time. And it was really at Rabbi Angela Bookdahl who kind of was like, enough of that. Like, I think you can do this job. That's why I asked you to do this job, as did the president who preceded me, David Edelson, and the executive director then, Livia Thompson. And it wasn't just like I needed a pep talk. You sometimes realize that those voices can win unless you have some cheerleaders who say, quiet them and get on with it. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life.
Thank you for sharing all that. You said a lot of really powerful and interesting things, right? Creating the space for people to own their own faith, to enter into their own Judaism, and knowing that the talent and the skills that you bring to that of writing and studying and sharing out the information and creating the access point for people, that being a way that you knew that you can and continue to lead. And also thinking about stepping into a top leadership role, in this case, the top lay leadership role at a large and significant synagogue, and thinking about how you can serve and the role in that moment, and also the way in which others made sure that you stepped up at a time where either the voice from inside or the voices around might have said, step back. And I think that that's extremely powerful to emphasize and to highlight that as well, too.
Well, you know, one of the things I found on your podcast, and this is where I do get a little judgmental or frankly weary of some of what's been ingrained in our girls, this sense of maybe not me, maybe I'm not good enough, ready enough. And everyone you've interviewed, it's like, these are the women who I want my daughter to hear. And they're not apologizing for their leadership, and they're not apologizing for their mastery and their expertise. And so too often, I will say, and this is where I'm judgmental, I will see on a panel or at a conference, the kind of disclaimer before the point is made. I'm not an expert, but I'm not sure I'm right. And it just makes me want to say, come on, you are the expert, you are the leader. You don't have to make the but before the assertion.
We'll stop there for now. I hope that even just those few moments has piqued your interest in hearing more and connecting in to the podcast, and we'll hear a little bit more of the diversity of my guests as well too throughout our time together this morning, afternoon, depending on where you're logging in from. And I just love what she said. You don't have to make the but before the assertion, but so many folks in general, and often female identified individuals, women, will do that. We'll put that caveat. So I love her charge to us and living through her example of stepping up to her leadership. Our second pillar is spirituality, and just to help folks tune into and hone in on the sweep of history that WRJ has been active for. We far predate the pathway, the access, the ability for women to become rabbis. The role and the training that I'm blessed to hold would not have been accessible to me, just over half a century ago. And in addition, one of the reasons that WRJ founded as NFTS was so important, so vital, both on the local but also North American level, is that women weren't able to hold lay leadership roles in our movement of any kind. So we were really the first to advocate for women's leadership and women's spiritual leadership, both as clergy and as lay leaders. We are rooted in a movement that's dynamic and engaging and based on Jewish values and practice. And that's one of the reasons why I was proud to launch the podcast based on a verse from our Bible, from our sacred texts. And to this day, we remain really deeply connected to our spirituality pillar. And with prayer, you'll find that if you ever attend one of our meetings or events, we open with prayer, we close with prayer. If we're together for Shabbat or meals, then we're adding in these prayers and this spirituality element together. One of the guests that I loved speaking with and was thrilled to be in conversation with her is Alana Arian, who is one of the preeminent leaders of Jewish music, Jewish musicians of this current moment. I love Jewish music of the past century, half century, and its influence that it's had on our congregations, our communities, our camps, our youth movements. And at the same time, we are continuing to see new musicians rise up and really capture the moment. And something that's really significant and special about Jewish music is that some of it is certainly intended for performance or for listening, but so much of it is about participating and building connection, building community, and building a group. And there's really this spirituality to music. So I'm going to play an excerpt from Alana's episode, and it was such a delight when we recorded this episode to sit in a studio together so that she could do some music live. So you'll hear her reflect on that as well too, on music as a spiritual leadership tool. So I will share again. I'll stand up for what's right. Gonna get it back to the right spot.
You could be in pre-K in Chicago in the preschool, or you could be, 85, like from a totally different place. I think that there's some melodies in the Reform Jewish world that I grew up at 5, like from a totally
Sorry about that.
Queen and her people are at risk and really their lives are at stake. And she is in this position as queen where she can do something about that. And, I've been thinking about it a little bit over the course of this season. I don't think that she woke up one morning 10 years before she was queen and thought, one day I'm going to be queen of Persia so that when the Jewish people are threatened, I'm going to be in the right place at the right time to respond, right? I think it unfolded and she was there in that moment. And she was there and she stepped up. So I'm wondering if there is a moment for you like that, a just for this moment for you.
We're in a moment in our Jewish life and in our broader culture of like enormous fracture, enormous isolation, infinite quantities of information to make us sort of hopeless and feel helpless in making the world better. Way more ways to be apart from each other than to be connected to each other. Like I'm suddenly feeling old enough that I can think back to my childhood and what was really different, in our culture then. And so there's a piece of me that just feels about that, about my work and sort of my place in this world that way. That like it is starting to be quite countercultural to go into communities with the express purpose of helping people connect to each other by singing. Yeah, my actual job, I think, is thematically aligned with your question about Esther, and the idea that like this time in history, this time for the Jewish people, this time for our country, this time for like, endless number of categories, it's really not normal to like make your way trying to get people to feel more connected to each other, trying to get people to sing together, trying to get people to feel connected to faith or their own ancestors. I mean, it's stacked against us now in a way that I don't think it was when I was a kid. And so I do feel like I bring something to this moment that, is specific. I do have something internal that makes people feel comfortable participating when they don't in their brain want to participate, to have people come out to a community where I'm visiting and have some sort of connection that feels sacred or important Jewishly and feel like that's a valid expression in today's world feels meaningful to me.
I have a song of yours
Yes.
that comes to mind.
Sure.
That I think captures the essence of a just for this moment and what you were just describing, which is I Have a Voice. And I was wondering if you would do that for us.
I'd love to.
I love that song, Ilana, because I think it really, the way that you wrote it, it speaks to the individual in the community, right? You wrote it in the first person. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. So it emphasizes what the individual can do, that everyone wants to jump in and sing it. And I think that's also really so much the message of this podcast as well, too, is highlighting people's individual moments, but then the power of them doing that together.
Totally. And I really appreciate that perspective on it. And my experience writing this song was I was going to spend a week as an artist in residence at WRJ Camp where I grew up in their final summer open with teens. And I was confused and sad about the camp closing because it was so important to my personal journey. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go to camp and I'll understand because maybe kids this is not for them anymore. When I was a kid, it's sort of like a leadership place to cultivate, leaders who are interested in activism and interested in advocacy and whatever, all that stuff. And I thought maybe kids today don't want that. And then I went and met these kids and I was like, blown away. I mean, I'm sure you've had so many experiences in your work of seeing what 14 and 15-year-olds are like right now. They know so much about the world. I mean, obviously too much in certain ways and too little in other ways, but they care deeply about issues. They are ready to get into it. I wasn't particularly a troublemaker as a teenager, but I don't really feel like I cared so much about the world outside of my little circle of friends and what was happening in our little world. And I was just so blown away by the way that these young people were holding themselves in the world. And so I wrote the song for those teens that summer, which was 2019. And it was cool to see, like you said, people sing this song, they jump into it, and it does have that first person thing. But the sound of 100 people singing it or 1,000 people singing it is a collective experience. There's also one other thing of the individual voice in the context of the collective, which is in the bridge, there's a little line of Hebrew from the morning blessings, like daily miracles, which is in the text that I'm used to seeing, Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam, etc. Sha'asani b'tzelem Elohim, like blessed are you, God, who makes me in the image of God. And in the song, I'm changed the conjugation to be in the plural we. Sha'asanu b'tzelem Elohim, right? The idea that like each of us using our voice, this sort of divine attribute that like when we really use it to connect and to advocate or to raise awareness on an issue or stand up for someone who doesn't have, you know, power or whatever, that you're engaging with that sort of most divine part of yourself. And the feeling of like, blessed are we, like what a blessing, all of us together to have that divinity in a collective way. So that's why you'll hear Sha'asanu. I will open my eyes. I will not look away. I will use this gift I've been given every day. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. I have a voice. My voice is powerful. My voice can change the world. Change the world.
So you can hear really how Alana uses that venue, that frame, to talk both about leadership and also we got to have a really great sort of behind the scenes, behind the music conversation about her thought process around creating some of those songs, which are her spiritual leadership vehicle. We do a lot more singing on the rest of that episode, so we really encourage you to check that one out. Our third pillar is social justice, and WRJ has advocated for women's rights, gender equality, and other issues of key concern since our earliest days. And we've been on the forefront for the fight for voting access and voting rights across all boundaries of gender and identity. And we've been at the forefront, as I was sharing a little bit earlier, about the fight for access to reproductive health care and freedom. We work on these issues on a local or national in our own country's level because we have a rich body of policy resolutions that we have written and passed since our earliest days in our founding. These give us the ability to advocate and to educate. The newest ones that we passed at last year's legislative body reflected on our stance on gender-based gun violence and reaffirming our commitment to abortion access, especially with the Dobbs decision in the United States. As a 501c3 and a religious organization, we advocate and speak out about policies and legislation supported by our Jewish values and by these policy resolutions. And we don't, in particular, reflect on candidates. And I say this knowing full well with the backdrop of the election coming in the United States. Among our top issues right now are abortion access, Israel, and specifically highlighting the experience of women in this conflict and democracy. So there are ways to engage with these issues that are appropriate both for our status as a 501c3 and also, reflecting on who and what we stand for. So I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that if you care deeply about these issues and also want to connect in with sisterhood and spirituality and fulfill that idea of gathering together in person with other folks, that we will be holding a North American Social Justice Conference convened by Women of Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C., April 4th to 7th, 2025. We are going to learn together, pray together, advocate, and gather. And then there will be a lobby day on Capitol Hill. And we really encourage folks to come in for that, knowing, even with our folks and friends logged on today, in our Canadian communities and congregations that since we're working in close partnership with the Religious Action Center, we know that we want to make sure both that that there'll be amazing opportunities for learning and advocacy and going deeper on issues and topics that are certainly transferable and relevant, bringing our education into action in our home communities and even home countries. And that we've worked with our Canadian congregations and communities before on the lobbying side of things. So we're attentive to that. So we do encourage you to join us for that conference. And in particular, the final day and a half, beginning the Sunday evening of that conference, will be open not just to those who identify as women or non-binary or gender fluid, who are core members of Women of Reform Judaism, but to anyone in our reform movement who resonates with these important social justice issues. To share a little bit more about that lens of the work, I'll point you toward 2 episodes since we only have time to listen to an excerpt of one. The first is with Rachel Sussman, reflecting on the election in the United States, but really more broadly about the way that we integrate our Jewish values related to reproductive rights and access into the way that we show up for political and social action, social justice and advocacy. And another episode from this season, an interview with Julia Jassy, who's a leader of Jewish on Campus, which is a student-founded, student-led university organization focusing on anti-Semitism and those experiences that are only increasing on college campuses. I'm going to share with you a final excerpt of my conversation with Dr. Kochav Elkayam Levy, who is a advocate, a thought leader, an academic, and an activist in Israel, who really has been one of the key leaders and recognized with the Israel Prize, the Paris Prize for Peace for her work, among other distinctions, on highlighting the experience of women on October 7th and the terrible accounts of gender-based and sexual violence. She'll refer to that briefly in this excerpt, but I just wanted to make sure to give that content warning. And she's an incredible leader. And you listen to this interaction between the two of us, and I hope you'll be inspired to learn more from hearing our whole conversation.
The theme of our podcast and the name, Just for This, comes from that line which some of us have been thinking about in recent weeks because of Purim, from the book of Esther, Mi Odea, who knows, maybe it's just for this moment that you find yourself in a position of leadership. And that's what's been inspiring me and all of the conversations I've been able to have so far with the amazing women leaders. And you said a little earlier that you don't think of yourself as a brave person. And I think that that's how I want to come into the question about Esther, right? Is maybe if we got into Esther's mind as well too, she also might have said, well, I'm not a very brave person. I've been hiding my Jewish identity. And then she knows when it's the moment to act. So is there a moment that you've had, or can you reflect on that connection to Esther and the experiences that you've had?
Yes, you see my eyes are filling with tears. I feel like at the beginning, when people told me that, in Hebrew, they say, Aim la'et hazot egat lamalchut. And I said, this is not a malchut. It was so difficult for me at the beginning. I felt like I just need to do this. There's no one doing this. I just need to do this. People told me, oh, this is your life mission. And I was like, I couldn't even say it to myself. I was like, no, this is what I'm going to do in the next month. I could bear the thought of handling this very difficult mission for the next month. I knew that this is what I have to do. So I didn't feel brave. It was just the necessity of the moment, the necessity of this moment in history to lead this effort, to give a voice to the victims, to make sure we are respectful to their memories. to their soul, to what they were a minute before they were attacked in this way, and not to erase everything that they have been through. And I felt, despite the fact that it was difficult for me to say it, I just knew that this is what I need to do. This is my mission.
There's a lot more to our conversation, so I do hope that you'll check that out, and just want to conclude my remarks by saying that it is an honor to get to share these moments with each of you and to reflect on them through the lens of WRJ's pillars, and that I hope that inspires you to think about what is your just for this moment, whether you've had one or thinking forward to a moment in a time when you can step up. It's amazing to bring on my guests, these leaders, but those moments are for everyone as long as you're attuned to them and you answer that call when it's the time to step up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Hirsch. That was inspiring and so engaging and motivating as well, which is really, really great at this time when we're all experiencing a lot of burden around our Jewishness. It's great to feel uplifted and inspired. So I really appreciate that. And I encourage everyone to check out Rabbi Hirsch's podcasts. I think, Sam, could you put the link to her podcast in the chat for everyone? That would be great. So it's time now for the Q&A. And while you're thinking about your questions, and please, as I mentioned, keep them short and concise and in a question format rather than a statement format for ease of answering. And just type them into the chat, into the Q&A bar on your screen. While people are thinking about their questions, I thought I would just ask you, Rabbi Hirsch, the same question that you ask all your guests on your podcast about your moment when you were called to leadership. And if you could share a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Marilyn. And it's only a matter of time before that question gets turned back on me when I ask it of so many wonderful leaders. So, thinking both more generally, I really feel like answering the call and stepping into the leadership role at Women of Reform Judaism as the CEO has been a just for this stepping up moment for me. More specifically within that, at our legislative body meeting, which is every 3 years, we have the opportunity at WRJ to open up our constitution for review and to make sure that the documents, the guidelines, the rules that govern us meet our values. And this past year, just a few months ago in June, at our legislative body meeting, we successfully voted to open up membership to WRJ, which has, since our founding, been known as the women's affiliate of the Reform movement, to those who identify as female, those who identify as gender fluid, and those who identify as non-binary, and also to those who identify as Jewish or those who are on a Jewish journey, but may not have formally converted. And, this is not, it's a just for this moment for me because I got to be a part of WRJ stepping up and leading in this way. So I'm proud of what we did, and I did in partnership with our wonderful leaders to move our community and to listen to our community and to go through a careful process. So that vote didn't just happen with a switch. We worked for months and really, in some ways, years to lay the groundwork for that. But we've led our movement in that way through our inclusion and by making the statement that that's who we are, both with gender identity, but also with Jewish identity as an important way of connecting with our modern world.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you blend your spiritual journey with your current work as CEO? It seems like it's quite a transition from being a rabbi with a congregation to being an advocate and a CEO.
The way that I answer this question sometimes is that folks will sometimes also ask me, when did you know you wanted to be a rabbi? And I've known that I wanted to be a rabbi for a long, long time. Attending Reform Jewish summer camp, rabbis would come to camp in a very casual and real human way. They would show up in their shorts and they would play wiffle ball and they would come and sing campfire stories. And they were real people, but who could teach and speak and inspire and sing and lead through Jewish values and Jewish meaning. So I knew that was for me. But that's the lens through which I relate to and view the world. And then went for my period of training and study to deepen my textual knowledge and the other supporting skills that are important for anyone to be in a rabbinic role. And I do also find that many of the things that we learn and trained in, and indeed I experienced and had the privilege to do when leading a congregation, are quite similar to the work that we do on a North American level. And at the same time, also every context is setting is different. But being a rabbi is the lens and the frame through which I view the world. And there are many different ways to serve in that capacity.
Right. And I'm wondering, in light of our theme of Kvel at the Well, if you can talk a little bit about how celebrating Jewish joy can be a form of resistance against anti-Semitism and all the dark things that are going on in our world right now. Certainly when we came up with this idea, this theme, it was before October the 7th. And we had no idea how much we were going to be yearning for joy and celebrating who we are as Jews. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I'm a card-carrying optimist. So, I hope not to a fault, because I think that that's just the valuable way to show up in the world. And while I think there's importance and meaning and significance in gathering to reflect and to remember and to support each other through challenging moments and challenging times, that might be a way in for a community or a reason why people step through the door, but they stay for the joy. They stay because they want to be in beautiful community and connection and prayer and song and just have positive relationships and feel like they're a part of something. So I found that in all of the communities where I've found meaning, local congregations and communities that I was a member of, that I was leading, that I'm connected to today, and certainly also in any of the more local district or certainly our North American gatherings with Women of Reform Judaism, that we support each other through these difficult and challenging times, but we feel and we radiate out that joy and that connection.
Thank you. There was a question about if there will be opportunities for our Canadian youth to benefit from advocacy training that youth in the US get through the Religious Action Center.
Yes, we are so thrilled as WRJ to be partnering with RJCC of Canada to be supporting through our Yes Fund, where we offer grants and philanthropic support to arms and affiliates of our reform movement, a Litaken training seminar for Canadian youth from reform movement congregations in Canada to do a very similar type of training, lobbying, and advocacy day in Ottawa that they have done for many decades in DC. So we can make sure to share out information about that with all folks who are registered. But I'm so glad that we will be offering that opportunity. And at the same time, I really mentioned in my remarks, I want to make sure that just because our North American Social Justice Conference this spring is happening in DC, that folks in Canada feel welcome and encouraged to attend, and always happy to have folks with us as well, and to tailor and hone that and help find meaning in that as well.
Right. I don't see any other questions arising. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the current projects that you're working on and what's really inspiring you right now.
Yeah, I'm just so thrilled about the conference and gathering together for that, and would also encourage anyone, if they're not as connected to a local sisterhood or women's group, to think about other pathways and ways that they can connect in. You know, our districts are so vibrant. I just got back from spending a weekend at one of our URJ summer camps with nearly 70 women from one of our districts, our Southeast district, which covers Florida and Georgia and South Carolina and that whole region of the US. And it's just wonderful for folks to connect into that. So to look for those opportunities, and happy to help folks connect with that if they reach out to WRJ on a North American level, so that they can be a part of that. And we would just love to meet people and get them all together.
Nice. There's another question. How is a Jewish prayer practice connected to joy?
How's a Jewish prayer practice? I find, and we got to hear just a little bit of Ilana Arian singing, that singing and making music together is so joyful and so joyous. And I recall the first moment that when I was leading my congregation that you referred to in Massachusetts, when we came back together off of virtual and in person during the pandemic, that there's just a different level of connection and spirituality and joy when you can pray and sing together in harmony, as opposed to the muting and the refracting. And it was even happening to me today when I was sharing the audio that it said, "Are you playing music?" It's like, you know, where we're meant to be is together, sitting next to each other, hearing our voices harmonize and come together. So for me, that's a very joyous spiritual practice for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's a question. How do your members relate to their home synagogues? Do they work for change within the existing system?
So, you know, it really, and that's one of the amazing parts about being the staff lead of a North American organization, is there's such variety across, you know, all of our sisterhoods, women's groups, members, and local communities, that I don't want to generalize, but I will say that so many of our sisterhoods and women's groups are deeply connected, involved. Some may serve as representatives on their synagogue board. Some may be the first to hear about a project or an initiative or something related to social justice, something that they've learned at one of our events or conferences, and bring that back to indeed impact their whole community. So it really varies, but absolutely folks are working on that level. And I'll just reflect that, you know, with the election coming in the states and our deep partnership with work on the state level, especially as that being the key venue for protecting abortion access and abortion rights in the states right now, that many of our local advocates in Florida, for example, have had a unique role to play. All of us, you know, can be connecting in with them, but they're the ones who are going to go out and vote and have been raising the awareness. And I got to spend some time earlier this fall in Florida with those advocates, just to make sure that they feel supported, connected, and inspired in such a perhaps challenging and an uphill battle. So they're really working together in coalition with the congregations, the communities, the Religious Action Center in Florida, but also with a broad network of groups working for change, and have been the conduit to connect their congregations into that work on a state level.
Great. There was a bit of a follow-up to that. Does the individual work with their home synagogues create tension with the kind of overall structure of the organization?
I mean, again, it's a general question, which would have so many specific answers depending on where we're located. But in general, you know, we work in partnership and in harmony with the policies, resolutions, and platforms of the reform movement. Although I think sometimes a little productive tension is good. In 1965, when we were then known as National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods, we were the first armor affiliate of the reform movement to pass a resolution that fully welcomed LGBTQ individuals into reform movement communities, into any kind of space. And we were the push that the rest of the movement, that our congregations, that our rabbinic organization, that the college needed to follow suit. And we have been able to be on the forefront of some of those conversations. And sometimes that productive tension is what leads us to change.
Thank you. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about a particularly challenging moment in your leadership journey, and kind of what resources you drew upon, and what might help those of us who are struggling?
Challenging moment. I mean, I think that to think back to serving in the congregation, that the COVID pandemic was, certainly we will all remember it as perhaps the most challenging time period collectively in any of our lifetimes or memories. So, how do you keep a community together in a time of disunity and a time when folks need to isolate and be separate from each other, when we are part of a faith and a people and a movement that organizes itself around being together, right? We go back to the 3 pilgrimage festivals when we were in Jerusalem of Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, and we are people who has always yearned, whether on a periodic basis in ancient times, because that's what we were able to do, or in our more modern context on a weekly or at least regular holiday observance, to be together. And what do you do with that when the instructive is to stay home and be safe? So we learned how to we made tough choices to shut our doors, to make sure that we were keeping people healthy and safe and keeping that value of pikuach nefesh. And we learned how to use technology and tools that kept us together. And sometimes we found that, in fact, more people were coming in at that point because of the access point and the tools, and of a yearning to be together, even as it was imperfect. And then I think the next phase of that was making the choice, when is the right time and the right moment to come back together, and to know that at its core is the value, but to do so balancing safety and all of that. It came up successively, 2 years in a row, around the High Holy Days in particular, when it would be such a larger group of gatherings, and to know that there's no one right answer about what to do. So just making the best choice in the moment, prioritizing health and safety and community.
Great. When you think about kind of the women in leadership roles that have inspired and mentored you, can you share a little bit about who that might have been and how they supported your journey?
And I'm so lucky each and every week on the podcast to get to speak with so many inspiring women. I was lucky to have a wonderful cantor growing up, a female identified cantor who early on, for me, it wasn't foreign to have a woman on the bima, or to have a clergy leader serving in that role. And she is one of the individuals who mentored and encouraged me toward pursuing a career in clergy, and several of my professors at the Hebrew Union College as well too, mentored and inspired and encouraged the work that I was doing as well.
We all need people to nurture us in that way. Yeah, thank you. I don't see any further questions, so I think we can wrap things up, but I want to thank you so much, Rabbi Hirsch, for sharing so deeply and engaging with us so thoroughly, and giving us a lot to think about. I really appreciate the inspiration that you've provided. I think we've got the link for Rabbi Hirsch's podcast, and I do encourage you wholeheartedly to give that a listen. Each episode is, each one is unique and inspiring, and features some really wonderful leaders in our community. And before we wrap up, I just want to mention that this is the first event in our 6-part speaker series of Cavell at the Well. And I hope you will join us for our next one, which will be on Sunday, December the 8th, when Rabbi Elise Goldstein will speak on the topic of open doors, open hearts, how women have enriched Judaism and changed the world. Very similar to our theme today, I think. Rabbi Goldstein is one of Canada's first female Reform rabbis and a visionary leader in the Jewish community. And as the recently retired spiritual leader of City Shul in downtown Toronto, she brings a wealth of experience and wisdom. She's going to explore the transformative impact of women's evolving roles within Judaism, discussing how women's leadership, scholarship, and inclusivity have not only enriched the Jewish community, but also reshaped it and the world for the better. So the link for registering is in the chat. And I want to thank our team of Building Bridges volunteers, Sam Margolis and Ann Petrie, for all their assistance, and our board of directors, our president, Jessica Havens, and Rabbi Lynn, who is our inspiration, for their support of this series of talks. Our gratitude goes to the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island and the Isaac and Sophie Waldman Endowment Fund held at Vancouver Foundation for their generous funding. I understand that many of you have already donated to Colet Mine when you registered for this talk, and so we are grateful for your support. But if you haven't already and you would like to support our work in building a vibrant community at Colet Mine, the link for our donation page is in the chat. And I want to just thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you are feeling inspired and ready to cavell at your own well, and we appreciate you joining us today. So now I hope you'll all join me in offering our heartfelt appreciation to Rabbi Liz P.G. Hirsch for the insights and inspiration she has so generously and graciously shared with us today. And Rabbi Hirsch, would you like to offer any final words before we?
Oh, just thank you so much for inviting me, for having me. It was a delight to get to share and to reflect and think with everyone. And I really do just return to that thought of encouraging everyone to think about when their own just for this moment is, or perhaps will be in the future, to answer that call.
Thank you so much. Farewell, everyone.